Good morning and welcome everyone to Deep Dives with New Perspectives.
Good morning. Hope everybody's enjoying wherever they are in the world. We're going to talk about wherever you are in the world today in one sense. The two outer planets that do encompass everything and everyone. That's
Other
what
than
they
our
are.
sun, they're the biggest planets in our astrology, right?
That's right. Yes. Of course.
Astronomically and astrologically.
Yes, exactly. So Jupiter and Neptune. We have an event this week with Jupiter moving in out of the sign of Aquarius into the sign of Pisces, where Neptune is. And both of them are said to rule that sign. So it's going to be an interesting time into the summer. Jupiter will be there until practically the end of July. I think the last 2 days of July it goes back into Aquarius while it's retrograde, um, and then stays there until the. It's interesting because there's a symmetry here. Are you having trouble seeing?
It's so funny, right? And here we're talking
A
about Jupiter.
Neptunian thing going on here.
Here we're talking about Jupiter and Neptune and Pisces, and it's like, what? My glasses are really dirty. I can't see through them.
What are these images? I can't figure them out. That's so Neptunian.
You mean I have to look outside of myself to see something?
Or maybe you just have to see a little deeper inside of yourself.
That's why I
Because
wore my special beads today. I figured they'd really help me,
ah, special beads, like
Yeah,
are
special
they?
beads, Jupiter, Pisces, Neptune, this is also very spiritual territory, right? This is like, prayers and mantras and God and religion and belief structures and the great unknown.
Well, exactly. Definitely the great unknown. So it's going to be a very exciting time. We will have a little bit more of that Jupiter in Aquarius um, from the end of July to the end of December. Actually, in both cases, the last 2 days it changes signs. So, so this is a brief period, but it's kind of a preview of 2022.
Yep. And today we're talking about is Tuesday, the 11th. We're talking about Jupiter going in on the 13th. And it's
Yes.
interesting. I don't know for you, I just always, astrology teaches us that life is about these unfolding cycles within the collective, especially when we talk about these outer planets. Anything from Jupiter outward are going to be these planets that not only they most likely play out in the larger collective field. And yet, if they do have personal contacts with other planets, meaning aspects or relationships with our inner planets, meaning Sun, Moon, Venus, Mercury, and Mars, we're gonna have a little bit more of a personal relationship with them. But I always love going back to see, like the last time, it's interesting is Jupiter has a cycle of 12 years for going around the zodiac. Neptune is 140.
About 40, yeah.
Yeah.
140 approximately.
And so it's interesting because the last time these two were together was 1855. And there's some interesting similar themes being played out again, which I think is very interesting. One is on February 10th in 1855, US citizenship laws amended. All children of US parents born abroad are granted US citizenship. That means like if you and I as US citizens were living abroad and had kids, before this time period, they weren't necessarily US citizens. And so it's very interesting because what are we looking at? We're seeing all these children who are being separated. Some of them are actually finally being reunited with their families, but a huge amount of immigration, trying to seek new ways. And not only here in the United States, but here around the world, there's great movement amongst people.
Right. And so it's almost a reverse too, though, because it's like these children who are coming into the country alone are given asylum, and I would imagine that the very Neptunian phrase, that the majority of them, if they so choose, might become citizens when they come of legal adult age, and and then they might be able to bring their parents in. So it's a little bit of a reversal, but still the same kind of theme
Theme, right? And
of
I don't know
looking
if you know what
at
this is,
family.
but on June 5th, there was something called the Anti-Foreign, Anti-Roman Catholic Know Nothing Party's First Convention. The Know Nothing, but because it's interesting, usually we think of like Pluto and Capricorn is really affecting the Catholic Church, but I would also, I mean, Pisces is a sign of Christ, right? So here we have like this, there'd have to be something about I mean, Jupiter and Neptune, like we were just talking about religion and belief structures, right?
Right. I was thinking about that. And it's interesting that it came up back at the last time they were both together in Pisces, because, Jupiter also rules Sagittarius. And so this Jupiter energy in Sag, where it was a couple years ago in Sag, and versus the energy in Pisces. And if you look at both of those realms, what are the distinctions? And I know a common one among many of us who really believe and act like we are spiritual beings. That is more a Piscean, Neptunian framework. With Neptune wasn't discovered at the time that Jesus lived. But the Christian philosophy that he brought to the world is really all inclusive. Matter of fact, I have often said that if Jesus himself were to come back, and maybe he has, he'd look around and go, he might have been one of those anti-Catholic people back in the 18, because I really believe he'd look around at the organization and go, this is not what I intended. And that's more of a Sagittarian thing, to
Right.
have that, to take a concept that is so broad and put it into a literal organizational structure, in which you can define the construct and its components and its regulations, its beliefs. You can kind of break them all down. Whereas Pisces doesn't have those boundaries. And so Neptune doesn't put the boundaries there. But Neptune, in a way, Neptune is inclusive of what is in Sagittarius. So Neptune is inclusive of Jupiter. And it's interesting. I mean, going to the mythology, which just flipped into my mind, Neptune was the Poseidon, the ruler of the oceanic world, underwater, and Jupiter, or Zeus, of the skies. And in some ways, the Jupiter realm, in our understanding, is limited, unless we think of the specific gases, like, oh, humans will only get oxygen this far out into the sky, and that's the limits of it. And the difference, though, the ocean has its limitation based on what's holding it, the earth. But one of the differences is that, and I just kind of lost it, is that the ocean takes things and dissolves them and encompasses them a lot faster than the air does, a whole lot faster than the air does, unless it's already disintegrating and the winds pick it up and move it, or the seeds and they move them. So there's this, and then you just made a gesture. You want to talk about that?
Well, it's depth, right? Neptune is about depth. I mean, we don't know exactly what's at the very bottom of the ocean. I mean, Jupiter, Sagittarius, Jupiter in Sagittarius isn't really considered to be deep, right? Because they're usually outwardly focused, that arrow's out there, pointing out, okay, where's my goal? What am I going to do? Whereas Pisces in the old world, in the traditional sense with Jupiter being the ruler, that's where the depth would happen. It's almost like the two faces of Janus in a way that almost has a bit of a mimicry with Mercury that we were talking about, last time. But I think that because of the mysterious, because we don't ever really know what is underneath, there are parts of the ocean that are miles and miles and miles deep that we can't, as our technology is just barely starting to have the ability to go down and view these things. It's like this very interesting thing, but it's also like, I think as we have this technology to do these things, it also mirrors our psychological, spiritual, emotional understanding as well. I mean, the things that we kind of take for granted now that we discuss, in families even, that wouldn't have happened 50 years ago. I was reading something recently that big, huge changes in families in this last century has really been about the expectations about what families are here to give. We have a very different idea and expectation about what family's supposed to give and offer to us than our grandparents did.
Right. But what you're reminding me of too with families is, and I really learned this with the family constellation work, is that on an energetic, emotional level, what our ancestors did is still with us, not just what our parents. And it's really more, I would say it's really more emotionally related, but it affects behavior and habits. Whereas if you look at a family and you see, and you look at your extended family, say, you see some of the distinct characteristics that keep on, like, I often refer to my family myth, and myth is a Jupiterian, Neptunian concept. I often refer to my birth family's myth as one of separation. They were migrants and left behind, etc. And yet I see that pattern not only in my immediate birth family, but I've seen it in my other related families of that same pattern. And it's more Piscean, it's more watery than it is that it's not like, when I bring this kind of thing up, and in my birth family, they often, even as before I even went to school, they referred to me as their little philosopher, because I would bring these things up and talk about them, and they'd go, "Where'd she come from?"
But you're speaking, what's really, what it's lovely about this, I think is so important for us to understand, is what you're speaking to are these archetypal human experiences. That many, there are certain kind of, I know, like from the Michael teaching, I think of it as like, there are these ideas that, there are certain lessons that we're here specifically to learn, as we grow and we become who we are. And I think, in that way that we get to see, I find a relief in seeing that I was not the only one to have to go through something, because that allows me to know that others survived it. Because there's also within that Piscean thing, there can be a martyrdom, right? There can be this thing about, sacrificing oneself for what one thinks is a higher, better ideal, but maybe isn't necessarily the highest, best ideal for the self. Right.
Well, there's also the flip side of it. There's the Redeemer as well. And
of course, because it's dual sided, right? You got two fish.
Right.
People talk, it's funny, I like hearing some of these jokes. Sometimes they say, don't be like, the fish that's in the flow is actually the dead fish. Kind of, but the truth is, it's about an inherent polarity. All the signs that are duality sign, with their glyphs, and Pisces is definitely one of them. There's an inherent duality. So there's an inherent Libran aspect to it that's here, life, death. I mean, it's that last sign, there's something that, One of the things I love thinking about with Neptune is, it rules fog, and there's something very mysterious about fog for those of us who, growing up in the Bay Area, you and I know what fog is like. There's something very mysterious in the sense of like that which is slowly, it's amorphous and like, oh, is that a tree? Is it a house? Is it a person? And then the way things come into view, and it's like it's very mysterious, it's very imagery based, and it also plays with our optic nerve, right? Because there's a part that we want to define so much as human beings. We want to know it's what that is. And we're also very anthropomorphic. We want to see ourselves reflected in our environment. So it's this interesting way in which we get to play with, are we in the funny house with all the crazy mirrors, or are we actually seeing truth? That's what this place is. It's not about having an answer. It's about kind of hanging out and sitting in the question. I have three more I just want to say or four more I really want to quickly do because it's really funny. John Bartlett, one of my ancestors, publishes Familiar Quotations. So funny because my book is coming out, on Planets on the Angle this year, so it's really great. John List's Prometheus premieres. That's very fascinating. And the hottest July in Stockholm since at least 1756 was recorded. Because what are we dealing with too? We're dealing with climate change. That gives me goose pimples actually. And you wouldn't think heat with Jupiter, Neptune, Pisces, but
Well, but
the
Jupiter,
interesting thing that
Jupiter
happens,
is
I'm
a
sorry,
fiery planet.
sorry.
You think Jupiter is a fiery planet as well as a watery one? And
Well, there's
Sagittarius.
also something that happens very interesting is that the way our planet regulates heat is it can take things into the ocean. And so our oceans are warming up because they're taking the heat. Now, here we've got all this focus on air planets, right? I think what's going to happen is that it's going to start being then taken up in the air, and we're seeing it. We just heard the other day, we saw that wonderfully horrific map of the United States about how much all the areas are warming up.
Yeah. So what do we do with all of this? This is amazing. Yeah. This whole. Also, I guess one of the things when you share that research of what happened back in the mid 1850s, when both those planets were in Pisces, that struck me was, yeah, Marx was on the rise with his philosophy of socialism, and I'm sure Abraham Lincoln and people of his ilk were also thinking about this whole issue of slavery. One of the things about Pisces is that
Right.
it recognizes a bondage when it sees it, and we in mundane astrology we talk about prisons being in that realm. We talk about people that are infirmed in hospitals and contained. We talk about people that are in convents or monasteries where they're limited in terms of access. And the other fish, if you want to refer to the duality of Pisces, has compassion for these people, for these limitations. And so what we've been seeing while Pisces has been in its own sign is that like Black Lives Matter, and it's time for reparations, etc. Well, with Jupiter going there and next year Jupiter being there more solidly, that's going to get that movement is going to get uh, more and more emphasized, along with immigration, Black Lives Matter, immigration, um, the whole, the whole, the whole kind of racial perspective of seeing people differently versus the fact that we are all really the same. We're humans, and yes, we have different colors, we have different sexes, we have different orientations, different languages, but all of those are external. They're not really internal. Or yeah.
It's funny as you say that, because I just love weaving in the past. So the Emancipation Proclamation was January 1st, 1863. We actually have a Neptune-Saturn opposition, Neptune in Aries, Saturn in Libra, but Jupiter is also in Libra, but closer to the end of the sign. So not, not in this water, but here is again that air theme, right? And the right human relationship, and the play, you know, Neptune and Saturn, those outer planets of social responsibility. And here we have Saturn right now in Aquarius. We'll have Saturn in Aquarius during this time. So I think, there's a really great opportunity for us to really address, like you said, Black Lives Matter. We talked about the reparations possibly be coming forward, being thought of in Congress. It's a time, it's definitely a shifting of understanding of how we're looking at one another, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and what also based on those things, we have Neptune in the last decan of Pisces, which has a scorpionic side to it, bringing in Pluto. And we've seen, well, Pluto has been in Capricorn for quite a while. We've seen some major shifts in our institutions and organizations and economy, et cetera. And we're in for more. That Jupiter joining that, Jupiter played a huge role in the pandemic that we've been having. And there's more to be uncovered. And one of the things in looking at these two planets there that really struck me is the whole idea of deception that which has been going on. I mean, we could use the prior president as a prime example of what is truth, what isn't truth. And yet he's symbolic, really, of how some of our institutions perhaps have been, because this is the realm of Pisces. Institutions fit into that realm. Some of them have been misleading us as well. And some of the differences that go on in this country, where some people say, no, I'm not going to do that, or that you have to dig deep to know why that's going on. And it's sort of we're coming to a time, I think, where we've seen, just take organizations and advertising and what's put out there, and how do you decide what's the best thing for you? Do you really need that next level of technology in your home, or are you just seduced by it?
Yeah, like the thing is, like the Peloton bikes, I'm thinking, is one thing is like, oh, the lower, or not the Peloton bikes, but the Peloton track thing that got recalled because children's kids were being eaten by them.
Right. Yeah. I saw an image. No. Yeah, no. Yeah. And so it's
Yeah, I mean,
really,
the collective illusion, the collective, again, it's that fog, right? Is it, are you seeing in the fog something you want, or are you seeing something in the fog that scares you? But is it real is the question I think we'll have to keep asking ourselves. What is the truth? What aspect of the truth is, and how do we play with truth?
right.
Because part of it is also metaphor, right? This is the land of archetypes as well.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that transcend. Go ahead.
well, I was just thinking of the film industry. It's been a very strange year in terms of watching things on your television or computer or some other device. But, looking at what's coming out, documentaries, major films, and the themes, and I can't name things right now, they don't come to mind, but that what film producers are giving us or offering us can often be clues as to a greater reality. And there are several that really point out the sleight of hand, or the lies, the deception, the cover-ups, etc. And they can be kind of triggers for us to look at our own personal sphere and what's coming into it, and how truthful it is. I heard a radio interview this morning about these robocalls. And for the first time, I got one the other day. Well, I've gotten them, but I've gotten one the other day that said something about we had to suspend your Social Security, Medicare number, et cetera, and luckily, so call this number or hit, I forget what I hung up. But basically, I'd heard enough from, the Social Security exchange that about we don't communicate that way. But it sounds so authentic. And that's just a blatant, and it's not just that, people using Social Security or Medicare or whatever. It's other companies. They're coming in and they're saying, we had to suspend your credit card, we had to suspend this or that. And what they want is that number, I guess. I don't know. But
Yeah, they
really,
do. Yeah, they do.
it's a time to suspend a certain level of belief and say, it's I want to believe you, but I really want proof.
Well, because the other interesting thing is when we think about back to 1855, that was like a big sea exploration period, big whaling period, and people migrating from Europe to the United States. And here, what are we looking at now? Elon Musk and others like wanting to take and create their empires in other planets. And it's like my partner Rich and I have been talking about lately is like, what if these individuals with these uncalculable amounts of wealth took them rather than worrying about colonizing other planets and actually reinvested in the planet that gave them their riches? It's something, it's very disconcerting that, like, I don't know, like I have to admit it, as an Aquarian, I don't really understand the allure of going to want to live on another planet. I'm very happy living here on Earth, and I'm kind of dedicated to what's going on here, and I'd like to see this Earth do better. So I mean, it's like, if people can have that kind of money to do that, then I think there needs to definitely be some sort of tax system, a little more of a scorpionic theme here that comes out, but to take care of what's here, to take care of the people who don't have the ability to move themselves lock, stock, and barrel to another world.
Well, most of these multi-billionaire, trillionaire people are senior citizens like I am. And I basically look at them and go, your time is limited here. Do you really want to spend it on stuff like that?
Yeah, and I was beginning to wonder that too, because I think there's something about the Piscean thing when you were talking about earlier. There's also the lineage. There's family lineage that I believe lies within Pisces, especially within Neptune, like the bloodlines, so to speak, that lie back. And so, for those individuals who have children, you and I don't have them. There's this thing of wanting, I guess, to provide for the children, the grandchildren, the great grandchildren, to create this kind of thing. But it's like, what we see time and time again when there are these sorts of wealth being given over and over again to these generations is that oftentimes it's just used. It's not done. It's very rare for individuals, especially in the second, third, and fourth generations, to have that money and use it for philanthropic purposes.
Right. Well, next year when Jupiter, and actually a little bit towards the end of the summer, Jupiter's going to move into those middle 10 degrees, 11 degrees to 20 of Pisces, which has also got a very family group oriented energy. It's a Cancer decan. And I'm just kind of briefly looking. Jupiter's not going to get into that while it's retrograde, but
Okay.
next year, 2022, we're gonna see some of this energy where the unlimited wealth, it might be changed. And I'm going, hopefully Biden will have the support needed to go through some of the tax changes that will support some of the health plans and other plans,
Prepaid six
and also
and
just the living plans. I mean, what is happening here in New Mexico has already happened in California and all of the West Coast and Colorado and maybe, well, of course, New York and stuff, where housing has become out of the range of the common income of a person who lives and works
A
in
regular job.
right,
Right.
right. Uh, that's not sustainable. I mean, well, we see what's happening on the West Coast where young people, are living, there's a multi families in one dwelling.
Or people living in their cars.
Well, that too. I know a friend of mine in Southern California who lives in a modest bungalow, very old area of California, of Los Angeles. Um, Her home is worth over $500,000 in terms of if she put it on the mail market. But and I even when I was in California, this was happening, and that was going on almost 30 years ago. That it's like, where do you move to? Yeah, sell your home. You have that money, but where do you move to?
I mean, I mean, that's what the new stuff is here in Santa Fe. I mean, we're
That's
talking
what I'm saying.
650.
Yeah,
You know,
and
and
that's
people
kind of
aren't making California wages here,
right, right.
for the most part.
But even in California,
Right.
they've made the minimum, amount $15 an hour, but that's not going to pay the rent on a modest apartment. Yeah, yeah. So there's something that has to give in this dynamic. I mean, and that it's kind of interesting because it makes me want to look like when I lived in Berkeley. Berkeley had rent control. San Francisco had rent control, and they did have equations for inflation and some of that. But I really need to call some people I know in those areas and say what's going on because I haven't done that kind of research, but there may be some answers there. Who
Definitely.
knows?
So, I mean, I mean, this is, the great deep sea. I mean, these are the two, are two of the largest bodies going into the sea of uncertainty. And, of course, this is going to be, this is kind of like bridging us over, getting us ready for, 2023 and the next round of whatever it is that's going to pepper humanity with new experiences, brilliant and terrifying to behold.
Well, we just you have to look at the beginnings of this country, because Pluto was there, and I forget the exact, but it was like the end of the 1800s, so.
How can people find you, Merrylin?
Moonwiseastrology.com is my website. And on the website, you can find my email address, MerrylynLeBlanc@gmail.com, as well as my phone number, 505-690-1878. And you can also find me at ksfr.org under the programs Moonwise and Moonwise at ksfr.org, which airs every Saturday at 10:30 Mountain Time, but also streams all the time on ksfr.org, as well as past shows or podcasts there under the program tab. And so, yeah, what about you, Michael?
People can find me at coremichael.com. I've got some free resources there and what upcoming free talks, or not free, but necessarily upcoming talks that I have going on and classes. My email address is michael@coremichael.com, 505-690-3860. If you like our show, please hit like. Thank you for all you new subscribers for joining us. We're really excited to have you. Thank you so much. Share with your friends. We'll see you next week.
Okay, bye for now.